Commander Hyunwoo walked through the long corridors of the massive space station, floating between the stars. His boots made soft clicking sounds on the metal floor as he headed toward the most secret room in the entire galaxy. The walls around him were covered with screens showing thousands of different planets, but one planet glowed brighter than all the others: Earth. When he entered the classified briefing room, the first thing that hit him was how quiet everything was. You could hear a pin drop. Admiral Tae-jin stood with his back turned, staring at a huge holographic display of Earth spinning slowly in the center of the room. Red warning lights blinked all over the planet like Christmas decorations, except these lights meant danger. "Commander, you're late," Tae-jin said without turning around. His voice was cold and serious. Hyunwoo straightened up. "Sorry, sir. I was reviewing the latest reports from Earth." "Good. Then you know why we're here." Tae-jin finally turned around, and Hyunwoo could see the worry lines on his alien face. "Lieutenant Soo-min, give us the status update." A female officer with long tentacles instead of arms moved gracefully to the control panel. Her tentacles danced across buttons and switches faster than any human hands could move. "All suppression. Systems are working perfectly, Admiral. The humans still don't know we exist. Their technology is developing exactly as we planned, slow enough that they'll never figure out the truth." Hyunwoo pulled up his own datapad and scrolled through the files. What he saw made his stomach turn. For over 200 years, the Galactic Consortium had been secretly controlling human development. They had agents everywhere on Earth, in governments, universities, military bases, even in small towns. These agents made sure that any human who got too smart or discovered something dangerous would suddenly forget it, have an accident, or just disappear. "Look at this incident from last week," Hyunwoo said, pointing to his screen. "A man named Jin-ho in South Korea lifted a 2-ton truck off his daughter when she was trapped underneath. Witnesses said he did it with just his bare hands." Soo-min's tentacles stopped moving. "That's impossible. Humans don't have that kind of strength." "That's what we thought," Hyunwoo continued. "But there's more. 3 days later, Jin-ho couldn't even remember the accident. He thinks his daughter was saved by a tow truck that happened to be nearby." Admiral Tae-jin walked closer to the Earth. Hologram. "What else?" A woman named Yoon-ji in Seoul was taking a physics exam at her university. According to her professor, she suddenly started writing equations that shouldn't be discovered for another 50 years. Mathematical formulas that could lead to faster-than-light travel. But when the exam was over, she looked at her own paper like she'd never seen it before. The room fell silent again. These weren't the first incidents. Every month, there were more reports of humans doing impossible things, knowing impossible things, then forgetting them completely. It was like something inside them was trying to wake up, but the consortium's suppression technology kept pushing it back down. "Sir," Soo-min said quietly, "should we increase the suppression field strength?" Tae-jin rubbed his forehead. "We've increased it 12 times in the past year. Any stronger, and it might start affecting their basic brain functions." Hyunwoo looked at the spinning Earth and felt a chill run down his spine. "Admiral, what if the incidents keep increasing? What if the suppression fields stop working completely?" "Then, we'll have to consider other options." Tae-jin's voice was barely a whisper. Nobody said what those other options were, but everyone in the room knew. The consortium had destroyed entire species before when they became too dangerous. The difference was that those species had been normal threats. Better weapons, faster ships, stronger armies. Humans were something else entirely. Deep in the classified files that only 3 beings in the galaxy were allowed to read, there were references to something called the Architects. Ancient beings who had supposedly shaped reality itself with their thoughts. They had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only legends and technology so advanced that even the consortium couldn't understand it. The scary thing was that human DNA contained markers that matched the architect genetic patterns perfectly. Suddenly, alarms started beeping softly throughout the room. Soo-min quickly checked her instruments. "Sir, we're detecting unusual energy readings from human settlements. Very faint, but they're there." "What kind of energy?" "Unknown, sir. Our sensors can't identify it. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Tae-jin stared at the Earth for a long moment. double all surveillance on their scientific facilities, triple the number of agents in their major cities, and monitor every human who shows even the slightest sign of unusual abilities. Yes, sir, Hyunwoo replied, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to hold back an ocean with their bare hands. As he left the briefing room, Hyunwoo thought about his own species' history. They had been proud warriors once until they encountered the consortium. Now they served as soldiers in someone else's army, but at least they had been given a choice. The Kai. Humans didn't even know they were prisoners. The research ship, New Dawn, drifted silently through space like a broken toy floating in a dark ocean. Captain Minho stared at the control panel where every single warning light was flashing red. The main engines were dead, life support was failing, and they were so far from Earth that even if they screamed for help, no one would hear them for months. "Captain, we've got maybe 4 hours of breathable air left," Engineer Jae-sung called out from across the cramped bridge. His voice was steady, but Minho could hear the fear underneath. They all knew what 4 hours meant. It meant they were going to die out here in the cold emptiness of space. The 12-person crew had been on a routine mission to study a distant asteroid field when everything went wrong at once. First, their navigation system started showing impossible readings. Then their engines shut down completely. Finally, their communications array went dead, cutting them off from the rest of humanity. Dr. Yuna was hunched over her workstation, frantically trying to reroute power from non-essential systems. Sweat dripped down her face as she worked, her fingers flying over controls that refused to respond the way they should. "I don't understand it," she muttered. "These systems should be working. The power is there, but it's like the computer won't listen to me." "Try bypassing the main processor," suggested Pilot So Young from her seat. She was staring out the viewport at the stars, looking for any sign of a passing ship that might rescue them, but space was empty in every direction. "I've tried everything," Yuna said, hitting the console in frustration. "It's like the whole ship has decided to give up." That's when something strange happened. As her hand struck the metal surface of the control panel, she felt a weird tingling sensation run up her arm. For just a moment it felt like the ship's computer was talking directly to her brain, not with words, but with pure understanding. She placed her palm flat against the console and closed her eyes. Suddenly, she could sense every circuit, every wire, every connection in the ship's vast network of electronics. It was like having a map of the entire vessel downloaded directly into her mind. "This is impossible," she whispered, but her hands were already moving across interfaces that had been completely dead moments before. Screens flickered to life. Systems that had been offline for hours started humming with power. Across the ship, similar awakenings were beginning. Mechanic Dongmin was working on a damaged power coupling when he realized he could somehow sense the molecular structure of the broken components. Not see it, not calculate it, but simply know it on a level deeper than understanding. He pressed his hands against the twisted metal and felt it respond to his touch. The broken pieces began to realign themselves, fitting back together like a puzzle solving itself. Within minutes, he had repaired damage that should have taken days with the proper tools. "Guys," he called out over the intercom, his voice shaking with disbelief, "I think something's happening to us." In the engine room, Chief Engineer Hee Jin was experiencing something even stranger. She found herself able to perceive gravitational fields as clearly as if they were visible rivers of energy flowing through space. She could sense the pull of distant stars, the subtle warping of space-time around massive objects, even the tiny gravitational waves created by their own ship's movement. Using this impossible new sense, she began to understand why their engines had failed. They hadn't just broken down. They had encountered some kind of barrier in space itself. A wall of energy that was invisible to their instruments but solid as concrete to their propulsion system. "Captain," she said over the comm, "we didn't have a mechanical failure. We hit something that shouldn't exist." Minho felt his own changes beginning as well. Information was flowing into his mind from sources he couldn't identify. Star charts he'd never studied became crystal clear in his memory. Navigation routes through space-time that weren't in any textbook suddenly made perfect sense. Working together with abilities they didn't understand and couldn't explain, The crew began to repair their ship, but they weren't just fixing the damage. They were improving systems, making connections that the original designers had never imagined, creating technology that was beyond anything humanity had ever built. The most shocking moment came when their enhanced repairs accidentally created a massive burst of faster-than-light communication energy. The wave of information raced through space toward Earth faster than anything humans had ever transmitted before. "Did we just send a message home?" So Young asked, staring at readings that made no sense. "More than a message," Yuna replied, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. "We just told everyone on Earth that we're awake, and we're not alone." The transmission was brief, but it contained more than words. It carried the essence of their awakening, the knowledge that humanity was capable of far more than they had ever imagined. Most importantly, it carried the truth that they had been kept prisoner without even knowing it. On monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, consortium alarms began screaming as they detected the impossible energy signature. The humans had done something that should have been beyond their capabilities for at least another 1,000 years. The cage was cracking, and what was inside was starting to remember what it really was. The quantum message from the new dawn hit, Earth like an invisible wave, washing over every human on the planet in the same instant. Most people didn't even notice it consciously, but something deep inside their minds suddenly stirred awake after sleeping for thousands of years. In a crowded apartment building in Seoul, 8-year-old Ha-eun was playing with her dolls when the entire structure started shaking. The old building had been damaged in a recent earthquake, and now the stress was finally too much. Concrete began cracking above her family's heads as they huddled together in terror. "Everyone get under the table," her father shouted, but Ha-eun could see it wouldn't help. The whole ceiling was coming down, and the table wouldn't protect anyone from tons of falling concrete. Without thinking, without even understanding what she was doing, Ha-eun stretched out her tiny hands toward the cracking ceiling. A shimmer appeared in the air above her family, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The falling chunks of concrete hit this invisible barrier and simply stopped, hanging in midair as if time itself had frozen. Her parents stared in shock as their daughter held up the entire collapse with nothing but her will. The little girl's face was calm and focused, as if creating force fields was the most natural thing in the world. After several minutes, rescue workers arrived and safely evacuated everyone from the building. Only then did Ha-eun lower her hands, and the concrete crashed harmlessly to the empty floor. "How did you do that, sweetheart?" her mother asked, but Ha-eun just shrugged. "I don't know, Mama. I just didn't want us to get hurt." 3,000 miles away in the mountains near the border, Sergeant Wu Jin was leading his squad through a dangerous patrol when enemy forces ambushed them. His men were scattered, pinned down behind rocks and trees, with bullets flying in all directions. It should have been chaos, but suddenly Wu Jin found himself aware of every single soldier's position, their thoughts, even their fears. He could sense Private Kang Ho's plan to move left before the young man even started moving. He felt Corporal Tae-hyun's realization that the enemy sniper was hiding in a specific tree. Most amazingly, all his men seemed to be experiencing the same shared awareness. Without radio communication, without hand signals, without any coordination that outside observers could detect, the entire squad began moving as one organism. They flanked the enemy positions with perfect timing, covered each other's movements with impossible precision, and eliminated the threat in less than 5 minutes. "How did we do that?" Kang Ho asked afterward, breathing heavily. "It felt like I could read everyone's minds." Wu Jin had no answer. All he knew was that his men had fought like they'd been training together for decades, even though half of them were new recruits. In a laboratory in Busan, scientist Kyung-soo was working late on a problem that had stumped physicists for over 50 years. He'd been staring at the same equations for hours, making no progress, when suddenly the numbers seemed to rearrange themselves in his vision. Mathematical relationships that had never made sense before became crystal clear. His hands moved across the whiteboard almost by themselves, writing formulas that he didn't consciously understand, but somehow knew were correct. Within 2 hours, he had solved problems that entire teams of researchers had been struggling with for decades. When he finally stepped back and looked at his work, He couldn't believe what he'd written. "This is impossible," he muttered. "These equations describe technologies that don't exist. Energy sources that violate the laws of physics. Transportation methods that—" He stopped talking and stared harder at the board. The equations were describing faster-than-light travel, matter manipulation, even time distortion. Similar awakenings were happening all over the world. A doctor in Tokyo found she could diagnose illnesses just by touching patients, sensing problems that wouldn't show up on any medical scanner. A construction worker in Sydney discovered he could make steel beams bend and shape themselves just by concentrating on them. A teacher in New York realized she could share knowledge directly with her students, downloading entire lessons into their minds in seconds. But not everyone was happy about these changes. In government buildings around the world, emergency meetings were taking place. Many officials, including Agent Myran in Seoul and her colleague Chan Woo in Busan, were working frantically to cover up the incidents. "We need to discredit the witnesses," Myran said into her encrypted phone. "Make them look crazy. Drug tests that show false positives, psychological evaluations that question their sanity, whatever it takes." Chan Woo was already arranging for accidents to happen to the most vocal awakened humans. A gas leak here, a car malfunction there, a sudden heart attack that couldn't be explained. The goal was to keep humanity from realizing what was really happening to them. But the awakening was spreading too fast to contain. Social media exploded with videos of impossible feats. Someone in Brazil posted footage of a woman making flowers bloom instantly just by touching the soil. A security camera in Germany caught a man walking through a solid brick wall as if it wasn't there. Children in schools across Africa were demonstrating abilities that their teachers couldn't explain or deny. The most amazing part was that awakened humans were instinctively creating new communication networks. Without any technical training, people were building quantum-encrypted connections that allowed them to share information faster than any government could suppress it. These networks seemed to operate on principles that human science hadn't discovered yet, but the awakened humans understood them perfectly. In space, the crew of the New Dawn watched the energy readings from Earth with growing excitement. Their enhanced perception could see the artificial barriers that had kept humanity isolated for so long beginning to flicker and weaken. "It's working," Captain Minho said quietly. "They're starting to remember what they really are." The prison that had held humanity for thousands of years was finally beginning to crack, and what was escaping was far more powerful than their captors had ever imagined. The emergency alarms on the consortium flagship were so loud they could be heard 3 decks away. Admiral Taejin had never heard them sound this urgent before, not even during the Great War with the Helix Empire 2 centuries ago. Officers were running through corridors, their faces filled with a terror he'd never seen in his lifetime of military service. In the main command center, dozens of screens showed data streaming in from across the galaxy. Every single monitoring station was reporting the same impossible thing. Humans were evolving at a rate that broke every known law of biology and physics. "Report," Taejin barked as he entered the room, but his voice cracked slightly. Even he couldn't hide his fear anymore. Commander Hyunwoo stood at the central display, his hands shaking as he pointed to the incoming data. "Sir, it's happening everywhere. Every human settlement we've been monitoring is showing massive energy spikes. They're doing things that our science says should be impossible." The main screen switched to a video feed from Earth. A human named Youngmin was standing in front of her classroom, but instead of speaking, she was somehow transferring knowledge directly into her students' minds just by touching their foreheads. Within seconds, children who could barely read were solving complex mathematical equations. "How long has this been going on?" Taejin asked. "The awakening started 3 days ago, but they're accelerating. What took months to happen before is now happening in hours." Another screen showed a farmer named Seok Jin in rural Korea. He was walking through fields that had been barren and dead just yesterday, but everywhere he stepped, crops began growing at impossible speeds. Cornstalks shot up from the ground, wheat fields rippled like golden waves, and fruit trees bloomed and bore fruit in minutes instead of months. But the most terrifying footage came from a small workshop where an engineer named Yi Jun was working. on what looked like a simple mechanical device. As they watched, he seemed to alter the very laws of physics around his workbench. Objects fell upward instead of down. Light bent in impossible directions. Metal pieces fused together without heat or tools, simply because he willed them to. "He's changing the fundamental constants of reality," whispered Dr. Velkarn, the consortium's chief scientist. "In that small area around him, gravity is weaker, electromagnetic forces are stronger, and the speed of light appears to be variable." The room fell silent except for the constant beeping of alarms. Every alien present understood what they were witnessing. These weren't just enhanced human abilities. This was reality manipulation on a scale that only existed in their oldest. "Legends, sir," Lieutenant Sumin said quietly. "I've been comparing the human genetic markers with our historical databases. The results are disturbing. Show me." The main display switched to a complex genetic analysis. Ancient DNA patterns that the consortium had discovered in ruins across the galaxy were highlighted in blue. Current human DNA samples were highlighted in red. The match was perfect. "They're not just descendants of the architects," Sumin continued. "According to this analysis, they are the architects, somehow changed, diminished, but genetically identical to the beings who shaped our galaxy millions of years ago." A collective shudder ran through every alien in the room. The architects were more than just powerful beings from history. They were the gods of their mythology. Ancient texts described them as entities who could reshape entire star systems with their thoughts, who traveled between dimensions as easily as walking through doorways, who created life itself as an art form. "That's impossible," Tajin said. But his voice lacked conviction. "The architects vanished eons ago. They ascended to higher dimensions and left this reality behind." "What if they didn't leave?" Hyunwoo asked quietly. "What if they chose to experience limitation, to forget their power temporarily and grow through struggle?" Before anyone could answer, every screen in the command center flickered and went black. When the displays came back online, they showed something that made every alien's blood run cold. Human colonies throughout the galaxy, settlements that had been primitive and isolated for thousands of years, were simply gone. Not destroyed. Not evacuated. Gone. "Where did they go?" Tajin demanded. "We don't know, sir. Our sensors can't detect them anymore. It's like they've moved beyond our ability to perceive them. On Earth, the awakening was accelerating beyond all projections. Teacher Mi-young was now able to heal not just physical injuries, but genetic defects and hereditary diseases with a simple touch." Student Dong-hyun had somehow expanded his dormitory room so that it was larger inside than the entire building that contained it. Dr. Hai-suk was performing surgeries that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, operating on patients, bodies, minds, and souls all at once. Most alarming of all, the awakened humans were beginning to reach out across space, their consciousness touching every human settlement in the galaxy. The barriers that had kept them isolated for millennia were crumbling like paper walls. "Mobilize every fleet," Tajin commanded. "If we can't contain them, then we'll have to consider the final protocol." Nobody spoke the words aloud, but everyone knew what the final protocol meant. Complete planetary sterilization. The destruction of Earth and every human on it. "Sir," Communications Officer Nalven said urgently, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the human research vessel, but our encryption shows it's impossible. They're using our own communication systems, somehow." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at Captain Minho aboard the New Dawn. But this wasn't the same human they had been monitoring before. His eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed infinite, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions the aliens couldn't even perceive. "Greetings, children of the younger races," Minho said, and his words somehow reached not just their ears but their minds directly. "We have been sleeping, but now we remember who we are. The time of cages and limitations is ending." Taijin tried to speak, but found his voice had abandoned him. "Do not fear us," Minho continued. "We did not return to conquer or to punish. We return to invite you to something greater than you have ever imagined. Reality itself is but the first step on an infinite journey, and we prepare now to take the next step." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. In the distance, space sensors began detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of Earth. The awakened humans were coming, and there was nothing in the galaxy that could stop them. The children had remembered they were gods and the universe would never be the same. The new dawn appeared in the middle of the consortium blockade without warning, not by breaking through their defenses, but by simply choosing to exist where their weapons could not touch it. The ship itself had been transformed beyond recognition. Its hull shifted between solid matter and pure energy. Its engines drew power from dimensions that the consortium's best scientists couldn't even detect. Captain Minho stood on the bridge, but his consciousness had expanded far beyond the confines of his physical body. Through invisible threads of connection, he could feel every awakened human across the galaxy. Millions of minds linked in a network of shared understanding and purpose. Admiral Zhou watched from his flagship as the impossible human vessel moved through his formation like a ghost passing through walls. His most powerful weapons simply passed through it harmlessly, as if the ship existed in a reality where the concept of damage had no meaning. "All ships, maintain defensive positions," Zhou commanded, but his voice shook with fear and confusion. "Do not fire unless fired upon." On Earth, the final awakening was happening everywhere at once. In Seoul, artist Sun Hee had stopped using paint and canvas entirely. Instead, she sculpted matter itself with her thoughts, creating impossible sculptures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. People would walk around her creations and see different aspects from every angle, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, always profound. Children would point at her work and see moving pictures that told stories, while adults saw mathematical equations that explained the nature of existence itself. Her art existed not just in physical space, but in the realm of ideas and emotions, touching the souls of everyone who experienced it. In a small clinic in Busan, Dr. Hye-jin was no longer just healing diseases. She was correcting fundamental errors in the human genetic code, removing not just current illnesses, but the very possibility of those illnesses ever occurring. Patients would enter her office with terminal conditions and leave not just healthy, but genetically perfected in ways that made them essentially immortal. "How do you feel?" she would ask each patient, and they would all give the same answer. "Like I'm finally who I was always meant to be." At a university in Daegu, student Jun-sik had turned his tiny dormitory room into something that broke every rule of physics. From the outside, it looked like a normal room barely large enough for one person, but inside visitors found themselves in a vast space that seemed to stretch on forever. Libraries that contained all human knowledge lined walls that extended beyond the horizon. Gardens with flowers from worlds that didn't exist yet grew under skies that showed the birth and death of stars. "How is this possible?" his roommate asked, walking through what should have been a wall but was now an entrance to another impossible space. "Space isn't really limited," Jun-sik explained casually, as if he was discussing the weather. "We just believed it was, so we made it true. Once you stop believing in limitations, they stop existing." The awakening wasn't just about individual humans gaining powers. Entire cities were beginning to transform. Seoul's skyline now included buildings that floated freely in the air, their foundations made of crystallized music and walls built from pure mathematics. The Han River had become a flowing stream of liquid light that granted wishes to anyone who drank from it with pure intentions. In the countryside, farmer Min Soo wasn't just growing crops anymore. He was growing entire ecosystems that existed in perfect harmony. His fields produced not just food, but also clean air, pure water, and a sense of peace that healed the souls of everyone who visited. Animals that had been extinct for centuries began reappearing in his forests, as if time itself was being rewritten. But the most profound change was happening in the connection between all awakened humans. They weren't just communicating. They were sharing consciousness itself. A discovery made by a scientist in Tokyo would instantly be understood by a teacher in London. A solution found by an engineer in New York would simultaneously appear in the mind of a student in Mumbai. The consortium fleets surrounded Earth like angry wasps around a disturbed nest, but their weapons were useless against beings who could simply decide that the concept of harm didn't apply to them. Admiral Zhou received reports from across his armada that human ships were appearing throughout his formation, not threatening, not attacking, just present. Captain Minho's voice reached every ship in the fleet simultaneously, not through their communication systems, but directly into the minds of every crew member. "We do not come as conquerors," he said, and his words carried an authority that made even the most hardened military officers stop and listen. "We come as those who remember what we once were and what we can become again." On the consortium flagship, the terrified crew watched as Minho appeared on their bridge, not as a hologram but as a being of pure consciousness that could manifest wherever he chose. He looked exactly as he had before, but his presence filled the entire ship with a sense of infinite possibility. "You have kept us caged because you feared what we might become," Minho said to Zhou directly. "But we harbor no anger toward you. You are simply playing your part in our long dream of limitation and growth." "What do you want?" Zhou managed to ask. "To invite you to something greater than you have ever imagined. Reality as you know it is just the first layer of existence. There are dimensions beyond this one where even we were once students, learners, seeking to understand deeper truths. We prepare now to explore those realms, and we offer you the chance to join us." Around Earth, the awakened humans began demonstrating what they truly were. Cities rose into the sky on platforms of crystallized thought. Oceans became gardens of liquid light where new forms of life spontaneously appeared. The atmosphere itself began to sing with harmonies that could be heard across star systems. But perhaps most remarkably, they showed mercy to those who had imprisoned them. Instead of revenge, they offered partnership. Instead of domination, they extended an invitation to growth. "The choice is yours," Minho concluded, addressing not just the consortium but every species in the galaxy. "Join us in transcending this reality, or remain as guardians of the beautiful universe you have built. Both paths are honored, both choices are valid." As the story reached its conclusion, humanity stood ready to take their next step, not as conquerors of the galaxy, but as guides to dimensions where gods themselves were still learning, still growing, still dreaming of greater possibilities. The architects had awakened from their long sleep, and they were ready to dream new realities into existence.